Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Sonny, and I am part of Riyaaz Qawwali, an ensemble based here in Houston, Texas. We're very excited that you could join us for another conversation within the diaspora about another relevant topic. Today, we're getting a few days even closer to the election than we were before. And these conversations are really geared towards having our community, who is not a monolith and has many perspectives, getting all of them, all the different perspectives to the table to talk about things that are impacting us. As Qawwali artists, we are honored to be part facilitating and part creating music that's relevant to these times of today. I don't find what Riyaaz Qawwali is doing as any newer, because Qawwali and art in general has always had a way of pushing the envelope, uh, tugging at what is considered normal or the boundary. But I do find it a fortunate space for us to be in as we look at how we can interpret Qawwali for a topic that's very important to us. And today, that topic to spark a conversations about xenophobia, which would be the theme of today's conversation. Just like last time, I have the privilege of being joined by many other Houstonians and Texans that have also, like me, lived much of their life in this locality and have experience that will make this a very rich conversation. I want to start off with somebody that Houston is very familiar with, Nabila Mansoor, who is part of Emgage, Texas, as their executive director. And I'd like to bring her on so we can have a conversation about this theme. And hi, Nabila, how are you?
I'm doing well and so honored to join you. We're like, I don't know, 4 days, 5 days out of the election, and
Yeah.
here we are speaking to each other about how it is we can bring arts and civic engagement together.
Yeah, that's right. And we're happy and honored again that Emgage has continued to bear with us and partner with us to really talk across many topics. This one specifically a very important one, a special one to us, because on one side we're an immigrant community, and on the other side, there's a little bit of let's look in the mirror to see where we may have been the problem. So I know you have done a lot of work to bring a lot of different perspectives together. So I'm so honored that you're part of this.
We're just excited to be here to be part of this conversation and really take a look at internally what it is that we're doing to be a part of the problem, and how is it that we are actually being affected by something that is the lived experience from so many in our community.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important because uh, to come to the table, you then only realize how the lived experience is very different. You know, we call ourselves South Asian, and again, we talk about us as one community. But even if you're from the same country and have the same religion, and you come to Houston and you'll have two different stories. So, kind of that lived experience you talk about, the more we're at the table with people who may not think exactly like us, the more powerful it is.
And the power that we have when we're able to overcome it and work together and collaborate
Mhm.
is so beautiful. So I think we have some internal baggage that a lot of us carry over from back
Yeah,
home. I was born here, but you know,
yeah,
those things kind of just seep into you. Um, and yet we also understand that there are things happening that are outside our kind of mental realm that make us do things, and to
mhm,
recognize that, to spend time, right?
yeah,
We have privileges that we're not even aware of,
yeah,
and much like the rest of the country is kind of having a racial awakening, I almost feel like the South Asian diaspora is also having its own awakening. And it's up to us as community activists and members to push that along and make sure that we're all aware of it.
Beautifully said. I don't think I could have said that better.
So I think we're ready to bring our other panelists on.
Yeah, I'm excited.
All right, so we have a great group of folks joining us today. I am so honored. I've just met her, but I feel like we are going to be good and fast friends. And this is Dr. Nidhi Trehan. She is a sociologist. Who better to talk to us about this? She's a visiting scholar with LBJ School of Public Affairs over in Austin. So she's just joined us.
Yes, Huckam Horns. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Riyaaz Qawwali, Sonny. Thank you, Nabila. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight and to speak about such an important topic, about xenophobia, both how we experience xenophobia as South Asians in America, but also what kind of xenophobic attitudes do we have within our community? So thank you so much.
And then also joining us is a superstar in her own right. I've just gotten to know her as well. Saadia Ahmed. She is with Thalin Consulting. She's a native Houstonian, but she has roots in Bangladesh. And she lives in Dallas. And she's joining us here as well.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to correct a little bit. I haven't lived in Houston, but I am a native Texan, born in New York and got here as soon as I could. And, that's what every Texan says, right? We got here as soon as we could. And I'm very proud to be a Dallasite. So, yes.
Well, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And next up, we have Danish. He is with another member of Riyaaz Qawwali, and he does live in Houston, if I have that right. And he is a very active in the Pakistani diaspora, doing a lot of interfaith work. And I don't think lives too far from me over here in Sugar Land, which is a suburb of Houston.
Yes, thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. I do live very close to Sugar Land, just south in the Rosenberg area, and have been in Houston area since 2013. So really excited about this conversation, and I think the topic of this conversation is really, really interesting. I think this is something we need to talk about as a community.
Yeah, so true. And Danish and I, many practice sessions before or afterwards really are the time where we become really philosophical and talk about what the music that we've sang for the last hour or 2 hours, how does that translate when we leave that concert hall or when we leave this practice room? So first of all, thanks so much for everybody on this panel. You all are much smarter and much more eloquent. So when I fumble, I look forward to you correcting me on definitions or perspectives where I would have missed something. The first thing I want to start with is I want to ground us into what the conversation is stemming from. Houston in Action started a project with artists from across Houston and said, listen, stay true to you and your communities and figure out a way how we can use the arts to bring up a conversation, elevate and amplify this conversation. And I can tell you just half an hour ago, I was talking to a big DJ in Houston, and I was saying, I remember not 20 years ago when I went to school, and from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, I'd have to be a different person. And then when 3 o'clock came, then I could be my true self and enjoy and talk about tabla and harmonium and what this share means or what that means. And here we have Houston in Action saying, you know what, do you, but just engage and figure out what you can do for your community. And so, that humbles me, and I feel like I have to say that as we start this conversation. I also bring it up because this conversation is coming after what we released is our second Qawwali in this series. And if we can bring up the lyrics of the Qawwali, I think I'll start with talking about the lyrics itself and what they represent. So this Qawwali actually is by Krishna Bahari Noor, and it's a very beautiful Qawwali. We chose it because it really does fit into the Qawwali ethos and the way we try to present during our live shows. On one side, you'll see transliterated the Urdu ghazal itself, and then the other side, my translation of it. And I want to share that with you because I think it'll ground us in the conversation. Zindagi se badi saza hi nahi, zindagi se badi saza hi nahi, aur kya jurm hai pata hi nahi. There is no bigger, greater punishment than life. Better put, life is the greatest punishment that one could be given. And what have you done to deserve it? What's your crime? Nobody knows. It's such a powerful line because you can look at it from a spiritual standpoint, from a practical standpoint, in the context of being in love and a fight. So I just think it has a wonderful starting point from which this ghazal moves into the next sher. The next sher, and this ghazal is much longer, but I've picked out a few sher that are part of our recording, is Sach ghate ya badhe, to sach na rahe, jhoot ki koi intaha hi nahi. And without pointing at one party or the other, I think this is a beautiful line because you could think about the political climate in any country, to be honest, and feel this is true. Translated, that's the truth, if increased as in exaggerated or decreased, if you take some pertinent detail out, is no longer true to its nature. It's no longer the truth. Whereas a lie can be modified, molded, turned, exaggerated as much as possible, and it's still a lie. इतने हिस्सों में बट गया हूं मैं, मेरे हिस्से में कुछ बचा ही नहीं. I've been parsed and pulled and separated into so many pieces that I have nothing left for myself. I have no piece left for me. And the last one, and I think this is the sher that really makes me enjoy this ghazal. I also feel like it will be a great starting point for our conversation, and is jiske karan fasad hote hain. Fasad, fights, conflicts. Jiske karan fasad hote hain, uska kuch ata pata hi nahi. For the entity for whom conflicts arise, disagreements arise, there's no sign of that entity anywhere. What we did with this ghazal, in terms of visual story, is, and I hope some people have watched it, is we talked about two people, one from one country, one from another. They apply to a role at a company, one gets it, and there's some conflict that arises from it. But I want to, hear from other people that may have watched it. We can talk about how the experience was for us to create it. But is there anybody else? If we can bring everybody else back on that watched it, and what you think about the ghazal?
This topic hits so close to home. And so when you listen to the lyrics and you see the video, there is this almost automatic connection. And for me, and I think maybe for a lot of other South Asians, I'll let others speak, it's not maybe so obvious, but it's in the little microaggressions, the small kind of comments. Sometimes the invisibility, frankly, like the just not seeing of you or placing of you. I think that's what connected with me, because I know what it's like when you're trying to assert yourself as a woman of color, as a South Asian, as someone who wears their religion. You almost feel like you're talking and no one's listening to you. And so in this one, someone didn't get a job. you know, maybe that's happened, I don't know, with me personally, but I certainly know what it feels like to be excluded in a sense. And I think that's what Qawwali does, right? Like it resonates
Mhm.
with you, with your own personal experience. And that's what I felt when I watched this.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I would love to jump into the first conversation. And again, if you have feelings and perspectives on the Qawwali itself, you know, feel free to tie them in and cross the conversation. You can find the link of the video that we released. We'll show that at one point. But we
Can I
wanted
add
to bring up. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
Sorry,
Danish.
can I add something really quickly? And I think this would come up, part of our conversation later on as well. But I think what really came out to me from the video was, that the fact that we are as South Asians, we're always sometimes thinking about the xenophobia that is sort of experienced by our community. But what really came out in this video was what kind of xenophobic notions are present within our community towards different groups within our community. And I think that really made me think about some of the issues and sort of have a look inside, as to what kind of racism and xenophobia that we need to work on as a community.
Yeah, beautifully said, and a perfect segue. I wish I would have just let you do that in the beginning. So xenophobia, and I'm going to give you the Wikipedia definition, is the prejudice against people from other countries. And I'm sure we, to some extent, have felt it, but the flip of that, what Danish is saying, is also important, and we may take some time today to reflect on that. But what I'd like to hear from you all is, how do you see it manifesting locally? Whether that's the city of Houston or whether that's, Texas in general or the United States. And how are South Asians affected by it?
No, so I'll go first.
Sure.
Since I was quiet earlier, so I wanted to say, first of all, xenophobia is based out of hatred, right, and hate, and that hate is something I think we're all feeling at some degree right now, especially as South Asians, as people of color, as women that wear a religion, as Nabila said. So I think it's something that's in the rhetoric around the world right now, whether you're looking at what's going on in France or looking in our own countries and cities. Also, especially with COVID-19, we saw the amount of xenophobia that came out, with, being it tagged as a Chinese disease and all the hate crimes that were happening. So I absolutely think, xenophobia is thriving right now in our world, unfortunately. But I go back to what Danish was saying, there's so much we can do as people. For me, as a South Asian American, as a Bangladeshi American born and raised here, I definitely see how a lot of xenophobia is absorbed into the culture in a way, whether that be based out of colonialism or it be based out of, different independence wars. But there definitely is xenophobia among South Asians, right? And, that extends not only within the South Asian community, but when it also comes to people that are quote unquote the other. So, for example, when someone who's African American or African goes to a South Asian nation, they definitely feel xenophobia. So it works all around. It's always that concept of labeling someone the other and that feeling of somehow we're better than them. And that
Yeah,
can be as much as, in each of our ethnicities, there's definitely colorism, right? And I
yeah.
know we'll get into that, I'm sure, a lot more, but
Mhm.
xenophobia definitely exists in South Asian communities, even in Bengali communities or Pakistani or Indian communities, when it comes to, that colorism and where your heritage is from and, how many generations back you were maybe a different ethnicity.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely exists. And
So, Saadia, I'm curious, from your lived experience, any things that we could talk about where you or the Bangladeshi community has felt that, has been the victim of that? I'd be curious to hear anything that comes to mind when we say xenophobia within that community.
No, I actually feel it among South Asians in general. I went to a university or a college that was predominantly Caucasian.
Mhm.
So there were a few South Asians, and we all clustered together is how it works. And and when it was a small group, it was fine. And with every year, there was a little more diversity at the school, and then it got branched off into the Indian group and the Pakistani group and the Bangladeshi group. And what was surprising to me is even with my generation, who has never lived overseas, many times has only visited maybe once. But there was this nationalism when it came to South Asian American students. And that was actually very surprising and a wake up call for me because,
Wow.
I never expected it from this generation. I think it's very practical and logical to think why maybe our parents' generation had that
Right.
with the warfare that happened in the independence wars and whatnot. But I definitely feel it even from our generation. And that's where I reflect back and realize that we have to change this from within our homes,
Mhm.
because that's where people of that are born and raised here are picking it up. It's from that
Yeah.
rhetoric and that mindset, and you absorb everything, whether it's the media. So if you're listening to a lot of South Asian media at your home, you're probably absorbing some of that implicit bias against other people that are South Asian, honestly.
Yeah.
So I know I go to a lot of my friends' houses and they all have like the Jadu box and the Roku box and whatnot. And while you're sitting there and you're listening, I'm just shocked sometimes. I'm like, I can't believe they just said that. That's so xenophobic toward another South Asian group, or that's so just flat out racist, honestly,
Yeah.
sometimes. So
No.
so I think we need to reflect on ourselves. Start with yourself. Do you have implicit bias that you've absorbed somewhere?
Yeah.
And deal with those things, and then realize you have to call it out even in your families. And
Yeah.
there's a respectful way to do it, but don't
Sure.
be silent when someone makes a stereotypical comment.
Yeah, that's so powerful, and I think we'll get to some of that.
Yes.
Nabila, any thoughts on that as being victim? Whether it's a personal conversation or a community.
So I was just thinking back. So the census just ended, right? So October 15th, 31st, there was a lot of just mixed messages coming from this government. And the reason the messages were so mixed and our census timeline was so shortened was because there was this idea that America is changing. And if we count everyone, then we count everyone. And that means that the power that one group has, which is frankly the white community, it's literally, Caucasian white on the census form, is going to lose some of their power. And so some of the tactics that were used in order for the count of the communities that tend to be not counted were, well, they weren't obvious, but they were done in such a way that it made our job, folks whose job it was to make sure that everyone's counted, it just made our job that much harder. So first they tried to keep the citizenship question put it onto the census form that had never been on there. Let's put the citizenship question. What happens when you put a citizenship question? Folks get scared. They don't want to respond to the census. Why is the government asking me all these questions? What are they going to do if I'm not a citizen and I'm here illegally? Am I not going to be in this country? Are they going to use this against me? Then the pandemic happened and we were supposed to have the census go all the way to October 31st. They shortened that timeline. When you're trying to get out to vulnerable communities that already have some hesitancy in responding to this form that asks a lot of invasive questions, frankly. We need that time because folks, frankly, are not worried about answering the census. They're worried about how they're going to put food on their table, how they're going to find their next job. To have all these different timelines, we're going to end it at the end of September, we're going to end it at the end of October. It made our job that much more difficult. And then also they wanted to, or they're still trying, and this is still in the courts, they're saying that once the census counts come out, we only want to count the folks that are legally here. So you are basically erasing an entire community of people. And those people are probably the ones that need the funding the most, right? Like they're low income, they don't have citizenship, they are oftentimes refugees. We spent a lot of time in those apartment complexes that had the refugee community. And so, you know, I see that as a form of xenophobia. And so we talk about all this internal one, but there's external forces that are really trying to disappear entire communities. And the reason they don't want them to get counted, I think, is power. You know,
Yeah.
with number comes power. And if you're not included in that number, you don't have power. And so a big message that we had was, we got to make sure everyone counts. We have to, if you worry about getting good schools, good roads, good infrastructure, let's make sure we all get counted. And our count, you know, we were working under some really difficult situations. And I'll be honest, it wasn't as high as we thought last year when we were making a lot of our plans. And I think I'm very proud of the work that a lot of us did on the ground. But I also understand that this was also another way to keep certain communities, our communities. I mean, let's be, you know, these are oftentimes immigrant and refugee people who are here, don't understand the system, to keep us down. And it always just breaks my heart, because if we want to get a real picture of what our country, our nation looks like, then everybody has to be included. That quilt has to have a patch for everyone. It can't just be one color. It can't be one square. It has to be different. And that's the beauty of the place that we live in.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you sort of just pulled us up to like sort of the perfect space. I think it's very unfortunate that we don't have, the representation, equal representation that we should. When I think about xenophobia, I think about my alma mater, the city that is considered liberal to its core, Austin, Texas. After going to UT, I spent and still, go back and forth, but I spent a lot of time in the Austin airport. And coming from the personal archives of Riyaaz Qawwali, one time we happened to be flying out, and I'd happened to come back to Austin, had some time, so I was enjoying Austin. I think Rudy's whatever barbecue is there in the airport, and I happened to discover that the person who programs the music for the airport was right there, and it was amazing because I was very excited about meeting somebody who was in a position of power, who could actually be inclusive in terms of the arts. And mind you, I have to preface this by saying the arts world is extremely welcoming to things that they don't understand linguistically, or they don't understand rhythmically or melodically. We have really been, welcomed, Danish and I, with open arms in some of the most rural areas of this country. So you would think in Austin, Texas, it would be, yes, I'm so glad to have met Riyaaz Qawwali, who is Austin born. I mean, literally, we were born under the clock tower of UT Austin. Like, it doesn't get more Texan than that. And UT Austin professors sort of gave us the, hey, you should continue this work. And instead, what I was met with when I asked him, could we present, was, hey, kid, that 9/11 just happened, right? We're not presenting that kind of stuff. And I think that was harsh. One, because I was expecting, of course, even if it was a rejection, a softer rejection. And it threw me for a loop, because I was thinking, here we are in the music capital of the world, and you'd think everything's okay and honky-dory, but it's not. And I think these are things that, when they come at you, I've spent a lot of my time here, and I find that I can speak to somebody, okay, even if they have a conflicting view. In that moment, it was like you freeze a little bit. You're like, okay, maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I am an outsider. Maybe my music is just for me, and it's not okay for the rest of America. So I think that these sort of things happen in sometimes very direct, aggressive ways, and I think Saadia had mentioned microaggressions as well as comes up. Danish or Dr. Trehan, anything to add here?
Yeah, as you're speaking, I'm reminded of some of my own experiences. I don't know if you guys know, but there was a Persian Gulf War. Okay, and at that time, if you remember, there was a lot of anti-Iranian sentiment. And if you just replace my last name is Trehan. But if you just replace two words, it becomes Tehran, which is the capital of Iran. And we are often mistaken as Persian, okay, my family, just because of last name. But anyway, we experienced, my father and I actually, we were just at a local grocery store, local Randall's, and someone just came up to us. This was during the Persian Gulf War. And I think I was a late teen at that time. Anyway, so, and I was in college, and I was also part of the peace movement. We had a peace vigil. I shared this with Saadia a couple of weeks ago. I was a student at Baylor, actually. So this is my also direct experience. But someone just came up to us in the parking lot and just said, "Go back where you came from." And that's a very common refrain that you hear when you're an immigrant. And unfortunately, I would say that, the current administration has let loose these types of sentiments, which, the previous administrations had always been very careful to be very welcoming, I think, publicly welcoming to immigrants and immigrant communities, people of color. And let's not forget the rich contributions we have made, all of us, to American society. And it's to be celebrated, including Riyaaz Qawwali. And what you're sharing with me, Sonny, I'm just sorry to tell you this, but I also find, because I'm from Houston, I'm from Sugar Land, one of the most diverse districts in America. I'm very proud of that. I'm very, all of you from Sugar Land, that. It's a very special place in a way. And it just breaks my heart that, though Austin enjoys this reputation of being this kind of liberal, cultural, hip place, whatever, we still have a lot of pockets of xenophobia here in Austin. And now I'd like to just segue really quickly into when the virus, came out, the pandemic here in Austin, when, it came out everywhere, but when the lockdown happened in March, there was a visible anti-Asian sentiment. And now I'm talking East Asian. So anti-Sino, anti-Chinese sentiment here in Austin. And, Chinese Americans were actually called names. They were harassed on the streets here in Austin, Texas. So yes, we have a long way to go. And I wanted to just touch upon what Saadia said about xenophobia. And, I think xenophobia is rooted in a fear of the stranger, the person you don't know. So a lot of it is ignorance. And then that ignorance can be morphed into hatred. And that's when it gets really dangerous. And so, but I just wanted to say that, I really, I'll give the floor to someone else, because there's a lot to share about what Saadia had covered earlier, colorism, and, coming from India, casteism also is a huge issue, but also Islamophobia. And all these, this confluence of xenophobia, this confluence of, rising intolerance is what is something we have to overcome. And this is the big challenge, I think, that we're going to face. Even if we have a change in government, come in a couple of weeks, okay? The sentiments in society are still there, right? And I feel like we have a long way to go. And I'm so glad we're all here on this panel to work on these issues together. So
I appreciate that. And
I would just quickly add something. The thing that really worries me is that what I'm seeing is, in the last few years, what has happened is what was considered sort of rude to say out loud, the feelings that were sort of like that existed but were never on the surface.
Yeah.
Those feelings and those words are now coming out on the surface, and I think that really worries me, because the country has become so polarized, and people who espouse these sort of like xenophobic feelings have now become emboldened to actually say it out loud, and bring it out on the surface. I'll share an example quickly that we experienced in Riyaaz Qawwali recently. We as part of the our group, our one of our main goal is to sort of present our South Asian culture and music to groups that are not familiar with this type of music. So we reach out to universities and music departments in universities, and we sort of collaborate with them. We do sort of a class, and then maybe we have a small little concert. So we reached out to, without getting into any names, we reached out to a Christian university, and typically we receive very welcoming response. But we reached out to this Christian university, and we heard back from a professor basically telling us that this is a Christian university and we have values that you don't espouse, without even knowing anything about us, without even knowing anything about. But in any other time, I don't think he would have done that. Having said that, I would say that we as a group, we didn't think too much of it, because this sort of thing has been happening. But a few days later, the dean found out about it and reached out to us and apologized, and then said that we would love to have you guys, and this is what that professor said is not what our Christian values are and what our university stands for. But the point here is, the people who espouse these sort of racist values are now becoming emboldened to sort of either bring it out on the surface, and sometimes, unfortunately, even act on it.
Yeah, Danish, great point. I'd forgotten about that, but it's always interesting when a higher power like a dean has to step in to to rectify something. I will say, because this is very important, that we have presented at Christian universities in Texas who have been the most phenomenal hosts. So, without saying, who was the culprit here, I will say that there are phenomenal, great Christian universities who have welcomed this and actually made it part of their mission to present work that's not part of the gospel or a specific religion. Now, I wanted to spend the first 10-15 minutes on the lived experience of us being a victim, because I think that's important. As an immigrant community, we cannot just jump to, oh, let's fix ourselves, but then without recognizing, this is the othering that many of us experienced when we came here, or as first generations or second generation. And I think that Saadia had mentioned something that I'll bring up, which is 10, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, I feel like, my parents give me stories that are just like, raw racism. Whereas now it's more microaggressions. And that's what Saadia had mentioned. And I think that's important for us to recognize that this is happening. And I want to acknowledge and give space to that, because that helps us move into the next conversation, which almost everybody had talked about, which is we can't talk about xenophobia and just mention how we were the victim here and here and here without talking about when we as a society have been a culprit, how we have been part of othering somebody else from within the community. And to me, it's important that we recognize that while we all look the same, we do have these problems. And that's one of the reasons that if you go watch the video, there's not a distinct difference between these two people, and that's on purpose, because I don't think xenophobia is as, easy to point out on TV anymore. Like it's more subtle, and we have to recognize that. So I'll pause to ask Dr. Trehan. I think you had hinted at a few of these things, and I'd also love for you to start the conversation by, you shared yesterday the broader definition of xenophobia, not just being, the hating of the foreigner, but if you could start with that, but then go into the othering that we've seen being done within the South Asian community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we've touched upon that a little bit. That often what happens is that whatever societal changes are happening back at home, in South Asia, there's a spillover effect here. And certainly we can see like a politics of, rising intolerance, for example, in India right now. And there's a concomitant like rising of Islamophobia here. And this is really worrisome because, when we come here, I think was it Saadia who said that, when there was a tiny group, we were all sticking together and then we kind of split up when more and more of our own, whatever own in quotes comes, and so, and by the way, I just want to make a quick plug for Desi Blue, which is all South Asian. It's a group, that was working to get out the vote also. But anyway, no, I just want to say that's why I joined the group, is because it was pan South Asian, and that really appealed to me. But anyway, getting back to your main question, Sonny, I think there's so many different forms of xenophobia. Absolutely, like the Sikh community. If you're a Sardar and you're wearing your turban, you're actually, you're wearing your religion, right? In a way, that's what Nabila said earlier, and you're visibly different, and that also the sort of anti-Sikh, sentiments within our society have also risen recently. But within, okay, so sorry to go back to your question about within our community. I would say that definitely there is sadly a rise of Islamophobia in the South Asian community. I would also say that because of the recent altercation with China in India, there's also a kind of anti-Chinese feeling going on. And this is something that we have to call out. We definitely have to call this out. And when we're in our, living room, when we're talking to our family, our relatives, we have to make them aware that, you can have that conversation because this is in your own family, and you can say, well, why do you feel this way, or why, what's behind this, or whatever. So at least that way, that person is made aware that, oh, okay, well, maybe I should think about it before just kind of having this knee-jerk, intolerant type of response, And so that kind of thing, a lot of work needs to be done. Also, we talked earlier about casteism. There was a recent case in Silicon Valley where there was a Dalit man who was an engineer, IT engineer, who felt discriminated against and was discriminated against by his senior in the company. So there's a lawsuit. There's a lawsuit on that right now. So again, these are like these spillover, social tensions which have come over here in the immigrant community. And I'm sure there's examples also from, Bangladesh and from other countries as well, from Pakistan, from Sri Lanka, of these kind of spillover impacts. I know in Sri Lanka, for example, the tension between the Sinhala and the Tamilian, that's kind of a little fissure there as well. So yeah, a lot of that is here. And then we have to work on it, right? We as Americans have to work on it and make sure that the next generation, and even, not the next generation, but everybody really, from our grandparents to our parents to our kids, understand that this is problematic. We need to work on it. So
yeah. And I'm sure there are other people that have an opinion on this. One thing I want to say is I think from my lived experience that xenophobia, or this fear of the other, is not rooted in conservatism or liberalism. I have met people on certain sides of the aisle that unfortunately you're just like, whoa, did that just come out of your mouth? And because, for the last hour, I was thinking that you'd be leaning. So anyways, it to me, I mentioned this because Riyaaz Qawwali for now 15 years has been trying to bring people together who may not think similarly. That was from our stage performances to when we get off the stage and talk to university kids and growing minds, many of them smarter than me, so I shouldn't call them kids. So to me, I think it's very important to recognize that, you know, as Emgage, OCA, and Riyaaz Qawwali really thought of this, we thought about how can we have a conversation that really brings people from whatever political ideology you hold, but for us to think about what it is that we can do better for tomorrow. But I don't want to, you know, step into that space unless everybody is ready. Does anybody have any other thing they want to talk about, sort of what's happening within? Because I think that is important, a topic that you all may have an opinion on.
You know, without getting into details, I just want to, you know, point out that even within the Muslim community, we have this Shia Sunni issue that have sort of come over, you know, from past, and I see here within, you know, our communities that we're still dealing with that issue, and we have to learn how to, you know, sort of come together and look past these things. You know, I think these things only tend to create more problems for us, and I think we can only do that if we and I think we can overcome the xenophobia that is directed towards if we are stronger as a community.
The first victim of 9/11 was a Sikh man wearing a turban. And so when racism hits us, you know, to the outside world, we're all the same. They don't make that, you know, Dr. Trehan made a very good point. She got mistaken for being Iranian. And as you grow older, I think you start seeing some of those internal prejudices coming out. And it's almost like, did I just not see that my whole life? Like, did I just let all of that come through? And for me, it came through the social justice movement and the African American experience, and realizing that there was a lot of privilege in where I live and where I came from. And then also recognizing that the South Asian diaspora that we have here in America also usually comes from communities that had a lot of privilege as well. So the folks that migrated here were the ones who went to school oftentimes, the ones that had the money to send their children to school, the ones that had the money to buy the ticket to get here. So, you know, when you talk about a case, and I've been following that case in Silicon Valley, it's fascinating. The way casteism creeps into the American workforce, and how now we have to look to American laws to solve casteism that hasn't been solved for generations in India. It's so difficult, and it seems so hard, but so important to do that work, and to recognize that we as families often come from places of privilege, and that a large swath of the countries we come from will probably never be in a place like this. And if they are, then we have our own biases against them. Has been a real awakening, and I think that is just happening. And we have a lot to learn from our friends in the African American community, how we deal with this. And I don't know what the answer is. I just know that, you know, I read it or some article about how Kamala Harris, even her, when she did a video with Mindy Kaling on cooking South Indian food, the neighborhood they were talking about back in India, the food they were speaking about come from a certain caste. So it's almost like this internal language that's very nuanced, and only those that are in the club know what it means, but we send signals to each other. And so how do you overcome that when you've grown up with it? It's a question I think our community is going to really have to grapple with.
Yeah, it's a question of sensitization, and this process of sensitization is ongoing. It's constantly ongoing.
Well, I think that Dr. Trehan, you had mentioned, color as well, right? And I think we would love to hear you speak about that. In Qawwali, there's a sher that we often sing. It's a Punjabi sher. Kis wal aakhya, kisi ne kis wal aakhya Majnu nu teri Laila disdi kali hai. Majnu ne jawab ditta teri akh na vekhan wali hai. So Majnu is asked, or Majnu is told, hey, your lover, Laila, looks a little dark, And Majnu then says, your eyes are not worth looking at my lover. And, the sher actually has a deeper meaning as you go, the ghazal has a deeper meaning as you go forward. किस वाला आख्या वे मजनू नू तेरी लैला दिसदी काली है मजनू ने जवाब दिता तेरी अख ना वेखन वाली है वेद भी चिट्टा ते कुरान भी चिट्टी विच अखर लिख दिते काले है वे मजनू as in he says that Ved and Quran and all the holy scriptures, the pages are white, but the meaningful thing is written in black ink, right? And I think I mentioned that because yes, we need to talk about color and how dark is bad and white is good. And that is a problem that we have on both sides. We think that the dark means bad, but we also think that, and Danish and I were talking about this, we think that white is good. I took some of my friends to South Asia, and all of a sudden, people stop in the busy streets of Mumbai and Delhi or Amritsar as soon as this Caucasian man comes. And as soon as they say namaste, it's like, oh, the heavens have just opened up and that's where we are. And, we need to stop. So I think that's interesting, but I'd love for, other perspectives on this.
Well, this is clearly like a post-colonial hangover, right? This whole colorism and, it's been so ingrained and it will take decades. I don't know how long it's going to take, but it's just what I'm finding really hopeful, though, and I was sharing this with Saadia earlier, you have public figures. You have folks like Nandita Das, the actress, who's come out and who's very much, talking about these issues. And there was also a campaign, I think, by Dove Soap to highlight this. It had, women of, all different, colors and all different, hair textures and everything come out and, be in this Dove ad. And it was a very popular ad, and I think it had an impact. So what I want to say is that even in India, people are questioning, people are challenging colorism. It was so much part of, the whole marriage thing, fair and lovely, wheatish complexion, all that stuff. Y'all are familiar with that. I don't have to share that with you. But so it's, all that is being questioned now, I think. And certainly we talk about the cultures of the Indian metro. We talk about Mumbai and Delhi and Kolkata and Bangalore and, young couples challenging the norms, young couples falling in love, God forbid. Anyway, but no, it's like, it's one of those things where all these things are, all of this is being questioned right now. And colorism is part of that. And I think, Nabila, you talked about Black Lives Matter. And I think that, Black pride, dark pride, is something that's coming out also in India and, perhaps Pakistan and, Bangladesh, I'm not sure, but, I'm more familiar with India. But it's like one of those things where, it's going to happen. The younger generation is challenging it. The younger generation is forcing their parents to question these norms. It's there. It's being questioned. So I'm very happy about that, actually.
Well, as we go into the next conversation, which is we've seen both sides of this, right? And I want to acknowledge everybody's experiences when it comes to being othered or having done it ourselves, sometimes on purpose, sometimes inadvertently. But it's important for all of us, and I think one of the reason I had such excitement this afternoon, because I knew we were all going to be speaking, is because all of you are leaders in your communities and you're trying to better that tomorrow that we all are going to live. So how is it that we can take the discrimination that we have faced, or the discrimination that our community is doing, and how can we round over those edges and make for a better tomorrow? This election is very important because your voice needs to be heard. I am not here to talk about a party that is not, this is not the platform for that, but I do think that an informed decision needs to be made and your voice needs to be heard. Whichever way this discussion goes, this election goes, at the end of the day, then President Trump, then President Biden, are going to be in Washington, D.C. It's you and me who have to handle Houston, not us alone. I don't give us too much credit, but we have to figure out how to live Houston and Dallas and Sugar Land and Kingwood and Clear Lake. And how do we do that in a robust fashion? Because we cannot let this election, as polarizing as it is, destroy the community that many of us Pakistanis and Indians and Sri Lankans and Bangladeshis, Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims have built together. We can't let this polarization pull all that great work we've done in the past. So, I know I asked a big question, but would love your response on that.
So I'll chime in on that because I was going to segue from what y'all were talking about a little while ago. First of all, I think we put a lot of emphasis on, we're so much more similar than we are different, right? That's something that's very common. But on the lop side, I think we have to recognize that we need to celebrate our diversities, right? Celebrate that make us different. Food, music. I mean, I applaud you guys because you're letting music bring people together and you're healing our hearts in more ways than one. So I want to say that I think the first step is making sure we recognize that it's okay for us to be different and have differences, but we need to embrace those things because it makes us stronger when we're different. It's a different perspective, a different background. The reason you brought all of us together is it's different lived experiences, as you were saying. So I think it starts really at home. As someone who's really into grassroots movements, I would say it starts with our kids. It starts with us reflecting on ourselves, reading books to our children that are about different cultures, taking them to places, or maybe virtually right now, to expose them to different cultures and different celebrations. For example, Navaratri was last week. My daughter, we made sure she knew what it was. She's not going to retain that much, right? But when she's older, she's going to, oh yeah, I remember this Masi called us and we talked about it. So exposing them to that, it makes us better and them better. And I think it makes them stronger and makes us stronger about being an ally. We hear a lot of talk about the word ally, especially after, George Floyd's tragic murder. We're not trying to tell anyone else's story, but we need to learn everyone else's story and we need to give them the platforms to tell their stories. So anything I think we can do as a community, Houston, Texas, Dallas, Texas, as Texas in general, or, nationally, when we're in a conversation, for example, what you did today, you made sure you went out seeking different perspectives and you brought everyone to the table. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, I think when we see that someone's not allowed to be at the table, we pull up a chair for them and we are speaking up for them. And I say that a lot. I would tell them we're doing this whole webinar about equity and trainings would be very inclusive, kind of like what you're saying about your experience at the court. But definitely that is something that has to be intentional. Like you have to be conscious that, okay, my volunteer base, am I making sure I'm reaching out to all communities? My board, is it diverse? When I'm giving out grants, is everyone on the committee coming from a different background so we can have a better, more robust system, right? So I think everything has to be intentional. I don't think it's something that comes naturally. I see it with my daughter. She's a little one. They automatically start realizing, wait, my teacher's skin is different than my skin. It's just something that naturally happens. But that's where we come in as adults or, friends and say, Yeah, but it's okay for us to look different. That doesn't make one person better. So, okay.
I love that. Yeah. No, I love that.
Thank
That was
you.
awesome.
I was just going to add that, we're in the midst of election season, so voting is really important. Saadia's actually been helping us with some of our phone banking, and Amatullah, one of our phone bankers, was telling me a story. She was on the phone with someone, and it was a young person, and he said, well, I don't know if I'm going to vote. It really doesn't matter. Voting doesn't matter. And my coworker was like, it might not matter to you, but it really matters to me, because if this election doesn't go the way we're hoping, then I might not be here. And she really meant it. A lot of our parents came here, or maybe we came here seeking a better experience, thinking that our children's lives are going to be better. We're going to have a better life for them, a better economic future for them. And I really believe we're in a existential place right now, where I'm not completely sure that my children or my children's children are going to be living in this particular country. And so voting for me is so much more important than just accomplishing my civic duty. I am worried about the future of this country. I don't know if we're one 9/11 attack away from all Muslims being put in an internment camp. I don't know. I mean, it probably wouldn't happen, but it's certainly in the realm of possibilities. So what are we to do to make sure that doesn't happen? Well, the one big thing that we do is vote, and we get a chance to do it every 4 years. And if we do not do it this time, then the repercussions can be disastrous. And so when my coworker was talking to this person on the phone, that's what she was trying to tell him, that, look, it might not, you have the privilege to sit out this election, and whoever becomes the next president, it really won't affect you in any meaningful way. But there is an entire community of people, human beings. Talk to those folks that whose parents that were sent back, those parents that were sent back to countries in Mexico and elsewhere, separated from their children. We don't know where they are. The fact that refugees are down to a trickle in our country. The fact that H-1B1 visas, the number keeps shrinking. I mean, these are real world problems. I know that I am thinking of exit plans from this country because I don't know what's going to happen. And I know many of my friends are as well. So I would definitely just push this vote, vote, vote. Desi Flu is doing wonderful things. We're on a lot of different WhatsApp groups. It's a beautiful thing to see. Everyone is just doing their thing. And I think everybody just needs to do their thing, because it's going to take all of us in order to get the vote out. So,
Nabila, can you talk a little bit about, getting the vote out? If there's a little bit of confusion, I feel like we talked about this recently. I went to vote. It was pretty easy. I'd love to hear, how are things in Sugarland? When can I postmark things by? You're much better at this stuff, so I'd love to hear from those details.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Vote by mail. If you applied for a vote by mail ballot, at this point, we're encouraging everyone to really just either drop it off at the ballot box. Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with every county, but I know in Harris County, you can do it at NRG, and in Fort Bend County, you can do it at the Elections Administration Office in Rosenberg. Check your local county. Don't put it in the mail. I just think you're really, really pushing it. We need that vote by mail ballot to be in the elections office by November 3rd. If you haven't voted, make sure you have your ID. Go vote. Early vote locations are, the things that are happening in Harris County. 24-hour voting. We're having a midnight vote party at at Tracy G Community Center with our Asian American partners, and they're voting at midnight because there's 24-hour voting locations, 8 of them across Harris County, drive-through voting. Polls will be open until 9 in many locations. Tomorrow's the last day of early voting. If you don't vote by tomorrow, then you can vote on election day. So, you know, the possibilities and the creativity that our election offices are doing in order to make voting as accessible as possible, please take advantage of it. The numbers are so high, but our work isn't done yet. We got to keep going.
And Houston in Action, you know, we just did a training with them, and they were mentioning that even on election day, they're going to have, like, there's a company that's giving like 100,000 snack bars and free pizzas, and I mean, there's just a lot of energy, you know, mind it, that I believe that whether you're voting red, blue, pink, yellow, white, make sure your voice is heard, and also make sure you stay safe. Whatever makes sense for you, do that. There's no right way. There's not anything that says this is being too cautious or anything. Just make sure you plan to vote. And I think the other powerful thing I heard from Houston in Action, and I wish Oscar, who's leading, you know, some of our work, or Andrea, who's been a wonderful support in this from Florida, was here to give you even more details. But you know, the other thing they said that was really powerful was, if you voted, great. Figure out a way to help somebody else get there, because I can tell you, Danish and I have known each other for many years. We can talk for hours about certain things, like xenophobia or color or Sufi poets. But it's very important that it turns into action. It's important that we get out there. You know, that's so, you know, it's like my music teacher always used to say, you know, if you just keep on listening to music or thinking about music, that's going to do you so far. But then you actually have to practice to get better at music, right? And a dancer or a playwright will say that I have to actually write to get, you know, in tuned with that higher power that's going to give me that creativity. You know, I of course, I think other people have something to say. I do want to acknowledge there are many people watching, and we've gotten some amazing comments. So one of them is specifically a question that I thought I'd bring up if everyone has a few minutes, is that as Houston is, Amar mentions this from YouTube, as Houston is one of the most diverse cities that we know of. How do you feel that Houston in particular can approach or approaches multiculturalism compared to other cities in Texas? And I think that that'd be interesting to hear about.
We have to get it, because if we get it right here, then the rest of the country gets it right. So I don't feel like we got to do it. No choice. We have to. And we're getting there. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But I look at these elections in the, you know, 52.8% is the last I saw of the South Asian vote coming out. We've surpassed, so let me get this right. The Asian American vote has surpassed right now the entire vote of 2016. So already beat it.
Wow.
I really think we're going to be the ticket. We're going to be the one that swings this election, whichever way it goes, because even though we're not really that big in numbers, we're situated in places where the election is going to be decided by a point or two. So our influence is almost outsized our numbers. And so let's take advantage of that. Let's get some really great people in office. And then once this election is over, let's sleep on November 4th, but November 5th, about how we get more Asian Americans, more South Asians to start running for office.
Sure.
I think the landscape is going to change dramatically. We're going to see a big change. We're going to see folks come out that have never thought, you know, for a long time, looking like this meant that you could never run for office. So let's start using that momentum and change that narrative and say, hey, this is how many votes we brought. We're here. And, you know, talk about like that table. Let's bring that chair, plop it down, and let's sit down and get to work.
Yeah. So I just want to pick up on what Amar's question was about multiculturalism.
Yes.
So in my opinion, that is the antidote to xenophobia. So you can see that in Houston, the more diverse, welcoming it is, and it's a patchwork, it's a quilt, like Nabila mentioned earlier, we're all part of this quilt. It's a quilt, it's a living embodiment, Houston, the diversity of Houston, of that. And what you said, exactly, if we can get it right in Houston, we can get this right across America, really. And Saadia is from Dallas, Fort Worth, and you've been so quiet. I want you to share with us a little more about Dallas area, because certainly Dallas is very diverse too. Dallas, Fort Worth.
No, absolutely. If we're going to talk about South Asian Americans in general, it's everyone's on fire. That's all I can say. There's a fire lit under everyone. I will tell you, I call the activist happy or golden hour like 1 a.m, because I see all these posts going out and all these articles going out and everyone's commenting. So there is definitely, as of this morning, I believe 9 million Texans had cast their ballots, if that's right. And that's 61%. So that's exciting. We've outdone 2016 and 2018. But that does not mean we're anywhere close to done. And, Kamala Harris is coming tomorrow. And, we had Beto come through yesterday. We had Jill Biden here. So I think across the nation, everyone's looking at Texas. And they're looking at Houston and Dallas and the major cities. And I see the South Asian community mobilizing in a way that I've never seen. And, I've been kind of involved since, I was even in school before I could vote with Obama, but I have never seen these kind of initiatives. And, in Dallas alone, I see 17 different WhatsApp groups that are super active about getting the South Asian vote out. And that's so impressive and exciting to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Danish, any last minute thoughts as we wrap up?
Yeah, so, I would like to just kind of say a few words around, what we can do to sort of overcome some of these things we've talked about. And I think one thing I truly believe is that, what we're seeing in the last few years in this country stems more from clash of ignorance rather than anything else. And I think in my experience, I think the only way we can overcome is if we build bridges with other communities, whether that means groups within our own South Asian communities or, other communities outside of our South Asian communities, and not just, other minority communities, but also other larger communities, Hispanic community, Black community. We need to build bridges so we can come together and sort of learn about each other, understand each other, where they come from, what culture and values that they espouse. Because, it's very easy to talk about the other when you have never, talked to them, or you've never, had a cup of coffee with them. But if you have a friend, if you have a friend and you know them, no matter how much other people talk bad about that particular ethnicity, what your experience is. How the other community or your friend, how their community behaves, or how their community, what values do they espouse. And I think that's the only way to sort of eradicate this ignorance that is causing so much racism and xenophobia. And I think I joined Riyaaz Qawwali because what I saw in the group, that people from very diverse backgrounds and very diverse communities were coming together, and not only bringing that out within the music. So within the Qawwali genre, there's so much different forms of songs that we have done, but also, just the fact that we're bringing different backgrounds and how we're creating space for people to sort of come together, build bridges, build connections, to sort of then, become friends and learn about each other. And I think music is one way, but there are so many other things. There are so many other ways that we can build bridges. And I think all of us, we need to look at what we can do, what can we involved in. For me, it was music. Perhaps for some of you, it might be something else that you can get involved and sort of start building those connections and building those relationships that can then help eradicate some of this racism and xenophobia.
Yeah.
If I could
Thanks,
add
Mansoor.
something based on what he said, that I think that's the key, right? What he said right there. Everyone can do something. We can't all do everything. We all have our own strengths and weaknesses. So, like, for example, I have an empowerment group of women, and they're all diverse backgrounds. They're all South Asian and Muslim, but they're all very diverse, right? And bringing everybody together is so powerful because everyone learns from each other's struggles and each person individually. And it makes that connection that Danielle was talking about. So thank you for that point. It was really powerful.
Yeah. Saadia and Danish, I appreciate your last thoughts. Anything else from Dr. Trehan or Nabila as closing thoughts?
I don't really have much to say. It's just been really wonderful being here with all of you this evening. And thank you for the work that all of you are doing, Saadia in DFW and Nabila. You're based in Houston, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's my hometown, Sugarland. And I just want to make a shout out to Ahmed Patil, who's in your Riyaaz group. Thank you.
I just wanted to plug one thing. We're doing a text bank this Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. We'll be joined by Chloe Bennett, and I am not so cool, so I am not as familiar with her as other folks are, but she is an actress, a young actress on the Marvel Agent Shield TV show. And so she's going to join us. We're going to text every Asian American that has not voted yet in Texas to kind of urge them to vote on election day. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be, you can sign up over there. We have the Mobilize link. We'll be doing it with some of our Asian American partners. So if you're available, we'd love to have you.
And Nabila, I think you were telling us that you got some cool points from your children because this celebrity is joining.
Yeah, they were like, I was like, she's this young actress, very pretty, and her name's Chloe Bennett, and their eyes just lit up. And so that never happens with me, so it was very special. And I savored that moment.
Well, I think this has been a fantastic thing. I think we could probably, at least I could go up for a couple of hours. Your families would kill you if we had to do another hour. But thank you very much for the rich conversation. We've gotten some wonderful comments, and I just want to thank all of them for staying a few minutes past. So Amr joined. Jessica was really engaged, and we had Amtullah, I think, Nabila from Emgage, who was commenting and talking about this being such a powerful discussion. So, thank you for all of you that joined live. As you watch it, I look forward to continuing the conversation. Most importantly, we're going to play just 30 seconds of the music video. We've been asked to play a little bit of that. So bear with us for 30 seconds and then we'll close out. This is a teaser that went out and was released, I think, just a couple of days ago. And now the music video has actually dropped. Zindagi se badi saza hi nahi. Zindagi se badi saza hi nahi. Oh, zindagi se badi saza hi nahi. Zindagi se badi saza hi nahi. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate each of your lived experiences. I appreciate the spaces that you come from, as well as the expertise you bring professionally to this conversation. The Qawwali is out. We really hope you enjoy it. We hope that you can provide us your feedback And I hope that this conversation, along with what we did in September, has inspired you to do your own research, to figure out how to do more before you go to the polling booths, and then make sure you vote. I cannot emphasize enough that our younger generation has taken this for granted. And if we can push that within even the South Asian community, that would be a big thing. Last but not least, I want to acknowledge that we are looking for you to get out the vote, whichever party that you're going to vote for. Houston in Action has a beautiful initiative that they are empowering artists to reach out to the conservatives as well as the liberals in their communities to get out the vote. OCA-Greater Houston was the first person that Danish and I, Ahmed, and Sid and all reached out to see if we could do this. Never having met me, this organization said, hell yes, when can we do this? How do we sign up? And then within, I think, half an hour, somehow Nabila was like, yes, I will join as well from Emgage. And I think that's just like, as an artist who is not, any longer every weekend performing, it's heartening to have these sort of experiences. So I know there is a better tomorrow because of people like you who are on the screen with me. I have to do a special thanks out to somebody who's you haven't seen in both of these conversations, but it's the reason that you see all these pop-ups. So cool and smoothly done. Maria from OCA. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. And remember, figure out a way to have your voice heard. And let's figure out a way to stop othering and understand each other. Namaste, Sat Sri Akal. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. These are small cultural things that we can start conversations with and get to know each other. And they start a conversation because we are now inviting more information into that conversation that we are coming into with somebody that may share different views than us. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Bye, Saadia. Bye, Nabila.
Bye.
Bye, Danish. Bye, Sonny.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks so much for joining.